On the left is Abram Hoffer, who, along with Humphrey Osmond, who was a psychiatrist from Scotland who went over to live in Canada and worked with Abram Hoffer, they did the original psychiatric trials on LSD. So in the 1950s, the psychiatrists were as mad as hatters because they're all high on mescaline and LSD, trying all these drugs out. And in those days, you could buy them over the counter, apparently. You know, they weren't scheduled drugs because they didn't know that they caused problems, you know, long-term wise. And then John Smithies, he was again another psychiatrist who worked with them in the early days. And there's David Hawkins, who Gill talked about with his levels of consciousness. Before David Hawkins became interested in the spiritual consciousness and things, he's a psychiatrist, medical doctor psychiatrist in New York. And he got together with the group with Abram Hoffer and Linus Pauling, who I'm sure you've heard of in relationship to vitamin C, but he was the well-known biochemist who was a protein structural person and worked out the structure of collagen. That's where he got his first Nobel Prize from working out how the structure of the collagen on the triple helix. And now, in the more modern times, taking all that work and bringing it up to date is Bruce Ames, the famous biochemist in San Francisco. So reactive intermediates, we looked at a little bit with that about the killing chemicals and their relationship to emotional illnesses. So reactive intermediates are substances in between converting one thing to another. So with reactive oxygen species, it would be things like superoxide going to hydrogen peroxide to nitric oxide. So those would be intermediates. What Abram Hoffer did is he studied some of the intermediate compounds of the catecholamines, in other words, the adrenalins. And this is where the story really gets interesting, because this is something really that you can do yourself. That's just an old picture of Hoffer with Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling, both of these lived to 93, 94. Hoffer talks about that he did an experiment with taking, I think it was 3 or 4 different nutrients, and everybody in psychiatry said, "You're crazy." And he said, ask me that when I'm 90 and I'll tell you whether I'm crazy or not. And of course he lived to 92, 93, as did Linus Pauling, and they said he was crazy because he believed in taking 2 or 3 grams of vitamin C every day. Now, you can produce these intermediate compounds mainly from tryptophan and from tyrosine. Okay, these are the 2 amino acids that Gill talked about. Tryptophan goes on to make serotonin, and tyrosine goes on to make adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine. And the ones we're particularly interested in this afternoon, there's a number of these, but these are the ones which are very simple to test, is one of the intermediates of breaking down serotonin, and we call that serotonochrome. Okay, this is an oxidized derivative of serotonin, oxidized form of serotonin. And it's always high in multiple systems atrophy. Multiple systems atrophy are people with neurological problems who are fading fast. They get worse and worse and worse. They don't fall into being a Parkinson's or an MS or a motor neuron. They're just all the systems are beginning to collapse. And these people tend to be high in serotonochrome, and therefore, from a manual muscle testing point of view, they weaken to it. Those from tyrosine are the adrenochrome. Now, adrenochrome is the oxidized form, as we'll see, of adrenaline, and this can be further oxidized to adrenolutin. And sometimes these 2 things come together, as you'll see Hoffer talked about. But also noradrenaline can be oxidized itself to noradrenochrome, and this is high in multiple sclerosis. So if you treat anybody with multiple sclerosis, you can use these markers that you've got and see. Now, what we found with multiple sclerosis, in every case, but it doesn't mean it's the sole problem, is that they're demyelinating, as you know, and 1/3 of myelin is made of a sulfur compound called sulfatides. Sulfatides. And sulfatides is stimulated by vitamin K2. So K2, as you may know or may not know, gets calcium out of the tissue back into the bone or in the teeth where it belongs. Okay? So if we get to build up a little calcium in the body, little calcium deposits and things, it could mean that you're deficient in K2. If you've got hardening of the arteries or anything like that, or you've got a family history of hardening of the arteries, you want to get yourself on K2 and tested and start to get that K2 back into the bone where it belongs rather than in your arteries and your other tissue. What happens is K2 will stimulate the synthesis of sulfatides, which is why what happens in multiple sclerosis is they lose the myelin. And they get calcium deposited in there. That's what multiple sclerosis is, multiple sclerosing or calcified deposits on there. Sometimes you get this in breasts, where you get calcified deposits in the breast. I'm sure you're all familiar with these. Sometimes they come out as little cysts in the hand, you know, arthritic problems and things, all to do with vitamin K2. Dopaminochrome is an interesting one because this is the ironic situation where you've got Parkinson's disease. And sometimes somebody mentioned, what happens if you've got somebody who's high and low in the same neurotransmitter? Was it you? Yeah. What you said is that you found that you were gallbladder and liver, which is high and low in acetylcholine. And when this has come up, we tended to think in the past it's probably in different areas of the body. You could be high in the brain and low in the big toe or something like that. But what's more likely is that the receptor site where dopamine attaches is blocked, usually with a heavy metal. And so you get a build-up of the dopamine outside the cell and a deficiency relatively inside. And that's why you strengthen and you weaken to it with the two. And the main culprit there with Parkinson's, if you treat any Parkinson's, is lead. So just test them with lead. It's almost guaranteed to weaken any Parkinson's. So you have to come to the conclusion there's an involvement somewhere deep down in there with lead. Now you won't see that necessarily in the clear. But when you give somebody the light therapy and everything starts to show, you start to see all these things. So with Steve, we could have probably tested him with all sorts of things, and he could have probably tested absolutely fine. Do you know anything that you're very sensitive to, food-wise, or metals, or chemicals? Dairy. So we could have been a patient in him, we could have given him, put some milk on him or in him, and he didn't go weak. You know, we've all had people like that, and they say, oh, I always feel bloated after I have milk and so on. Switch him in, get all those muscles and systems working, then put the milk on, and then you'll see, boom, what happens. Okay, you see the bigger picture, if you like. And then you start to find with these neurological problems, they start to display the toxins and things underneath. So this was a little cutting from a journal. Here we see dopamine, and this was the first time I'd actually seen dopaminochrome mentioned. Now, it has a particular structure that we'll see, which is common to all these metabolites, which are basically indoles. So let's have a look in a little bit more detail, those from tryptophan. And all these are indole structures. So what an indole is two rings, one which is 6 sides to it and one which is 5. So an indole is a byproduct of the digestion of tryptophan, and is one of the compounds that gives the feces its characteristic odour, together with scato and other substances. So indole is what makes the poo smell. Okay? So they're normal compounds that the body produces, but you'll see they've got the 2 rings. This is critical. 5 rings, 5 sides to the ring, 6 joined together. That's an indole group. Here we got tryptophan. Okay? Going on to 5-hydroxytryptophan, which Gill talked about, to serotonin. Serotonin will then act as a neurotransmitter and be metabolized, or it can go on to acetylserotonin and then methylated to melatonin. So a lot of our patients have sleep problems, and most of those will strengthen to serotonin. Will strengthen to melatonin. Then what you do is you go back, do they strengthen to acetylserotonin? And if they do, then go back to serotonin. So there'll be a block somewhere here between serotonin, acetylserotonin, and melatonin. So you're looking to see which one strengthens. So if a person needs something, they strengthen to it, don't they? Okay, if you need vitamin B6, you strengthen to it. If you don't need it, you weaken to it. Okay? So if there's a problem here, you'd strengthen to melatonin, and you would weaken to acetylserotonin, because you've got a relative excess of that because you're not converting. So that's called the substrate, and that's called the end product. So if there's a problem here, that will weaken and that will strengthen. So you can immediately go in there and say, yes, you've got a sleep problem, I know exactly where that is. It's a methylation problem, you'll probably respond to methyl B12 or whatever it might be. Have you noticed with your patients, unless you don't ask them, how many don't sleep properly? It's loads. It's increasing and increasing and increasing. And they all show too low levels of melatonin. And the evidence, certainly from a lot of scientific reports, is that the frequencies are shutting down the melatonin receptors. Okay, and if you think what frequencies are around you when you go to bed, you shut the curtains, you turn the lights out. Hopefully, if you've got a switch by the side, you switch the switch off so you're not in a current there. When I go back, when we go abroad and I come back and I've turned my phone off and I turn it back on in the house, I've got at least 5 different networks come up from neighbours. I've got Lily's network, so-and-so's network there. So even if I switch mine off, I've still got 5 coming in. Okay, you're sleeping in that. Okay, you're sleeping probably in 4G, and soon you might be sleeping in 5G. Sleep is an increasing bigger problem. Bruce Lipton talks about this 10 years ago in The Biology of Belief, how much vibration affects the receptors, particularly the melatonin receptor. And so if you've got vibrations of a particular frequency, the cell receptors shut down. They don't open up, so they don't allow the melatonin to link on. Interesting, isn't it? Because I've noticed this, and I thought it was just imagining, but I always ask patients how they sleep. And well over 50% say, I don't sleep very well at all. You know, I wake up about 3 o'clock or whatever it might be, and then I can sometimes get back, and then I fall asleep about 7 o'clock, and then the alarm goes off, and then I feel awful. And, you know, it's a common. Stick your hands up, those who sleep 7 hours or more straight through without a break. 1, 2, 3. Maybe 4 at the back, she's not sure. 4. That's it. Apparently, we should all sleep 3 hours a break. I think one day we did, didn't we? Do you remember one day when you were younger, you slept through? And, but it's very unusual for most people to sleep right through now. Now, what we met is, of course, if you wake up and it's dark, your body doesn't reset its body clock, its circadian rhythms anyway, does it, as we saw? I bought a book 6 months or so ago on red light therapy. Has anybody come across red light therapy? And in that book, he distinctly tells you that red light's great for nitric oxide, all sorts of things, and the immune system. But he said it's the blue light that resets the body clock, the circadian rhythms. And it was on about a year ago on BBC Breakfast television about it, and that they'd actually found it was the violet blue end of the spectrum that resets the circadian, and not the red end. The red end has other therapeutic value, but it's the blue that picks up in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the body clock, to reset it. Now, tryptophan itself can be oxidized, or rather decarboxylated, has the carbon dioxide removed from it, to make tryptamine. And this occurs in the gut. By certain bacteria in the gut can decarboxylate tryptamine into tryptophan into tryptamine, which then can become methylated into methyltryptamine, and then a further methylation into dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, as we'll see. So this is a double methylation pathway. So DMT is definitely a double methylated tryptamine there. Serotonin itself can be oxidized, if it doesn't go through another, to serotonin. So here we see tryptamine. Note the indole ring, okay? And note the ammonia group on the side there. So the decarboxylation of tryptophan that occurs in plants and certain foods. Examples of this is cheese, mushrooms, cashew nuts, all my favorites. Don't you just love those? Or most of us do love those. It raises blood pressure through the vasoconstriction action by the release of noradrenaline at the postganglion and its sympathetic endings. Other hallucination compounds which are derived from tryptophan is the dimethyltryptamine. So the dimethyltryptamine, which we talked about there by the double methylation, otherwise known as DMT, is rich in ayahuasca. Okay? So if you've ever gone out for a trip to the Amazon and partaken of the drinks, no? No, but you hear people who do. And if they have a good trip, they have a good trip, and they feel wonderful. And if you have a bad trip, you never go again. It's living hell. It's like LSD. They're all based on the same compounds, same structure rings. And it's just what you're holding in mind at the time. If you do the ceremonies apparently with the ayahuasca and you're all prepared for it, you'll probably have a great spiritual trip. of enlightenment and things. But if you're a bit worried about it, you've got anxieties, you're not thinking straight, you'll probably have a horrible one, just like with LSD. So DMT is a well-known hallucinogenic compound. DMT can produce vivid projections of mystical experiences involving euphorias and dynamic hallucinations of geometric forms. That's LSD. LSD, you note the rings here, the indole rings there, on the base of the molecule there. So LSD was an experimental compound which was available over the counter to anybody who wanted it in the late 40s and 1950s. And it was people like Hoffa and Osmond who experimented with these. They did all the groundwork on there, and they were actually proponents of it. They thought it was great stuff. And it actually tended to resolve many alcoholics. A lot of people with depression and alcoholism forgot it. Bill W., who started Alcoholics Anonymous, was a great believer in LSD. He was an alcoholic, obviously, himself, which is why he started, and he was a great follower of it and found that it cured him of alcoholism. So now let's move to the other type, which is the catecholamines, in those based on tyrosine. So the first chart, you don't have to understand any of this. And one thing I want you to remember at the end of the day today is all these names and things don't matter. Okay? What matters is what balances them. Okay? Just like with Steve, we're not really interested that he's got high histamine and low serotonin. What we're interested in is zinc. That's what the answer is. We can find the answer, and now what we want to know is how and why that's occurred. Remember what Hoffa said, if you can get the right nutrients in the person, you can balance all those brain chemicals and restore their health. That's what matters. It's getting the right nutrients and finding out what it is and tailor-making it for Steve and for you. Whereas, knowing the names is great because we want to know what it is that's happening and why it's happening and explain it to the patients, why they need the zinc, but it's not essential. Okay, so don't get panicky about, but it's just very interesting if you're into emotional problems. So phenylalanine, tyrosine, these are our basic catecholamines. That one can become decarboxylated again by bacteria from tyrosine to tryptotyramine. Now tyramine is in aged foods like cheeses, wines, sauerkrauts, yogurts, chocolates. It's the thing that stimulates the migraine headache. So it causes vasodilation in the brain. Anything which is fermented, citrus and also oranges and things. Tyramine, so it's aged. This is the person who gets a migraine if they eat old cheese. You eat Parmesan and it's full of tyramine, eat new cheddar and you're okay. Helen, my receptionist, said the other day, she said, her partner, he had a terrible headache this morning, really, really bad headache. And I said, what did you have to eat? And she said, we had some turkey and some salad and potato, nothing very much. I said, well, did he have anything else? And she said, no, he had cheese afterwards. I didn't have cheese. She said, no. I said, what was the cheese? And she said, oh, the extra mature from Waitrose. Extra mature. Mature is not so bad, but extra mature is older. And bang, gave him the tyramine headache. Okay, so anybody gets, after cheese can't manage cheese? Guess you can give you headaches, but it gives a lot of people nightmares. Really, really bad dreams. Really bad nightmares. My father used to always tell us that, if you had a dream, did you eat cheese? Cheese gives you headache, it gives you nightmares as children if you have cheese in the evening time because of the tyramine. They didn't know what it was that did it, but tyramine is a horrible compound which can give horrible thoughts and processes. So these will go on to make dopamine, and L-dopa is the intermediate there. And then they become methoxytryptamine around here. And you'll see eventually this pathway can lead to a compound called mescaline. Now, mescaline is an extract, it's an hallucination compound which is extracted from cactuses. Aldous Huxley wrote about this in the 1950s and things. These were the people who were awakening their consciousness and taking all these psychedelic drugs. Okay? And they thought at that time that it was, real experience of psychic events and things that were happening and enlightenment and so on. But it was the results, unfortunately, of the drugs. So when you get a high, unfortunately, you tend to get a low that comes with it afterwards. But mescaline was one of the first things. And what Hoffa wanted to discover was that they were very similar symptoms with mescaline to schizophrenia. So people who'd taken mescaline often had the similar symptoms to schizophrenia. So what he put two and two together, being a psychiatrist, is there a compound produced in the body which has a similar structure to mescaline? And that might be the answer why people get schizophrenia. And so he searched and searched and searched, and then he came across this structure, the indole structure, which was common to all hallucinogenic compounds. So he looked to try and find out where this was coming from in people, and that's how orthomolecular psychiatry developed. So if we go here, we've got tyrosine going to L-dopa to dopamine, noradrenaline to adrenaline. Now, if adrenaline then becomes oxidized, it becomes adrenochrome, which we'll see as an irreversible pathway. Once you've done it, you can't get adrenochrome, won't convert back to adrenaline. And adrenochrome will then further be reduced to adrenolutin, which may be more toxic than even adrenochrome. Dopamine, as we said, could be oxidized to dopaminochrome, and noradrenaline to noradrenochrome. So these are all oxidized derivatives of these neurotransmitters. So let's get that one. So this was done in 1962. This chapter describes the activity of adrenochrome and some of its derived compounds. The effect of adrenochrome is considered first upon simple systems. Then the conversion of adrenaline into adrenolutin in humans, article about how to do that. And then he found that adrenaline, when oxidized, turns pink in color. This is interesting. So when it's exposed to light and to oxygen, it turns pink. So adrenaline itself is colorless. So what they were doing at that particular time often is when somebody needed adrenaline for an asthma attack, that sort of thing, they were injecting them with adrenaline. And if that adrenaline was pink, they went crazy. Absolutely crazy. They had terrible side effects from it. Then I realized that you've got to look after adrenaline. You mustn't let it become oxidized, otherwise it's very toxic. So this oxidized pink adrenaline was identified to contain adrenochrome. This compound, formed by the loss of one electron from the adrenaline, is very unstable and can rapidly change back to adrenaline if that electron is replaced. Significantly, if the electron is not recaptured, or if this cannot occur because of the deficiency in nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, oxidized adrenaline will then lose another electron and become adrenochrome. So it becomes an irreversible pathway. You'll notice here, significantly, if the electron is not recaptured, or if this cannot occur, it's because of a deficiency of nicotinamide. Nicotinamide is vitamin B3. Okay? Now, vitamin B3 is otherwise known collectively as niacin. Abraham Hoffer started to use niacin as the antidote for people with high adrenochrome, and is treating schizophrenic patients with very, very good success. But he used very high doses, and if you've never tried niacin, you know that you get a strange side effect, which is a flush. So he would start off with small doses and build up, and if people got the flush, he'd then hold it at that level, and then after some days, apparently, of taking it, you didn't get the flush anymore. And he was talking about taking grams of this stuff. Normally, 5-10 milligrams will bring a flush on. But he was using very high doses. And that's really been the basis of a lot of orthomolecular medicine, is very high doses of the substrate, whereas now we would say, well, let's look at the cofactors and things to help that person make it more applicable. For instance, Linus Paulding would use 10-15 grams of vitamin C to treat a cold. Nowadays we'd say, well, maybe 1 or 2 grams if you use zinc and the other cofactors with it. This was all back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and nobody really knew much about niacin at that particular time, except for the fact it was the vitamin which, when it's activated into its coenzyme, is called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD for short. And the reduced form is called NADH. So now we know that this is commercially available, which it wasn't in those days. We can test the people with NADH, and this is what the people were deficient in. So when the adrenochrome is high, it's because they're deficient in the reduced form of NAD, which allows the adrenaline to become oxidized. So basically, it's a deficiency disease. Okay, so adrenochrome leading towards schizophrenic type behavior is fundamentally a vitamin B3 deficiency, but specifically not niacin, but the activated form of how niacin works, which is as NADH. So we're very fortunate now because we can buy NADH. We have it available as a glycerin compound, and it shows up in an enormous amount. I went for years and years with NADH as a capsule, and it never showed on anybody, very, very seldom. But in glycerin, it shows up, you know, enormous number of people, because an enormous number of people have got adrenochrome problems. We're all quietly a bit schizophrenic. Some of us are a bit more schizophrenic, okay? But it's just a matter of the degree of it and how much adrenochrome we've got. And you're about to find out that answer in a minute for yourself. Adrenochrome cannot be changed back into adrenaline. Adrenochrome is very reactive and promptly forms adrenolutin and a large variety of other oxidized indoles. Pink-adrenaline contains a mixture of these various oxidized derivatives. Now, here's an abstract, and this always interests me about colour and wavelengths. The present study reports the oxidation of epinephrine or adrenaline, a neurotransmitter. Do you know why the Americans call it epinephrine? Because you mentioned that. Anybody know why it's called epinephrine? Because the word adrenaline and noradrenaline is patented by the pharmaceutical industry. So you're not allowed to use that word, so they come up with the word epinephrine instead. Okay, so adrenaline, a neurotransmitter by a lipid-compatible lipophilic compound, chromium in this case, oxidant. The kinetics of the reaction is studied in organic media in the presence of acetic acid by ultraviolet vis spectroscopic method. The rate of the reaction is measured by monitoring adrenochrome, the oxidized product of epinephrine, at 455 nanometers. Now 455 is in the blue range of the spectrum. Okay? And when you have somebody with adrenochrome, because I can make the acetates, as you know, I make all sorts of types of acetates, at 455, it doesn't work. I was so disappointed with it, but we tested 1 nanometer each way, upwards and downwards, and it's 462. It's pretty close. 462 is the wavelength of the spectroscopic emission of adrenochrome. So now you can do two things to verify if a person's got adrenochrome. You can use the colour, which I wouldn't base a diagnosis just on the acetate, but you can use the vial of adrenochrome, which you've all got given in there as well. Or I think that's in the kits, isn't it? Yes. Don't start using it yet, though.
Yes, sir.
We need to finish the story off, otherwise you might go crazy. So it's 460, 62 nanometers is the spectroscopic emission. In other words, the energy that it gives off, which we can actually measure. Okay, there it is, 462. See, it's mid-range blue. So the same sequence occurs with other catecholamine compounds, such as we mentioned, dopamine, noradrenaline, and these produce noradrenochrome, dopaminochrome. Vernon Woodford found that adrenochrome slows the Krebs cycle and could, in the brain, lead to problems, symptoms of mental illness, probably due to the damaging of the mitochondria DNA and by its inhibition of certain heme synthesizing enzymes. And in the second part this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about heme and those enzymes, because again, that's the second part of this whole story with what's called MOVE disorder, or cryptopyrrole, sometimes it's called pyruria and so on. So the thing about this is adrenochrome damages the mitochondrial DNA. And this is where most of the harm in the mitochondrial DNA is where you make the repair to the Krebs cycle and the electron transport where we make our energy. So if you damage the DNA in the mitochondria, your energy level goes down and you don't repair. And then you end up with chronic fatigue problems. So, your bells are ringing there. Could chronic fatigue be related to stress? Well, of course it is. Isn't it? Everything ultimately is stress, but how does that stress manifest in one person? Do they metabolize the adrenaline, or do they end up with oxidizing it? And if they oxidize it and it switches this mechanism on, it'll poison their whole mitochondrial system, and then they'll go into lockdown or shut off. What was the word for the vagal, polyvagal? And go into chronic fatigue, you know. Right, reduced heme, as we'll learn later on. Reducing heme, which goes on to make a whole load of enzymes, will lead to low levels of hemoglobin and myoglobin, which is the compound in the muscles which carries the oxygen. Low levels of cytochrome C and cytochrome C oxidase, which are in the mitochondria, so you get low ATP. You get low cytochrome P450, which means you don't detoxify very well. You get low myeloperoxidase and nitric oxide synthase, which is low immune system. There's that word nitric oxide, which we talked about just after lunch, didn't they, with killing off or the immune system against the coronavirus. What do you learn from that? You learn that the people who are going to get the coronavirus bad are the ones who are stressed. Okay? If you take your nutrients and you say, yeah, well, I'm all right. If I get it, but I'm going to get over it and have a positive attitude. If you listen to the news now, 24/7, it's the top subject, isn't it? Is that creating anxiety and fears in the people? Of course it is. You know, you're living it. You're almost breathing it now. And every time you go somewhere, you're thinking, there's a Chinese-looking person. They've got a mask. And, you know, I touched that. We went out last night, and when we had the meal, they had a buzzer, you know, when you book the table, and then you get a buzzer. And she said, oh, here, take the buzzer. So I took the buzzer, and I thought, hold on, who else has touched this, you know? I wanted to get a tissue out or something and wipe it. But you become paranoid in the end about it, isn't it? And that's how they go. They reckon that's how they got the Spanish flu after the First World War, because people were so stressed for so many years in that, so much stress, that they just fell down like flies when the virus came out, because they were saying, you know, people were just dying down of Spanish flu. And they did. You know, whole streets apparently would die in one day. You know, could it spread that quick, or was it something to do with the psyche and the emotion and the stress of the life, you know, 4 or 5 years of war? Right, so myeloperoxidase, nitric oxide, so our immune system goes down. Catalase, which means that we reduce our hydrogen peroxide, our free radicals, goes down, so you get inflammation. Sulfite oxidase goes down, which means you can't drink beer and wine very well. That's the worst of them all, isn't it, really? And thyroid peroxidase, so you get low thyroid function. Typical sort of patterns of everyday patients, aren't they? That come in. Could they? And this is why 50% of your patients coming in will show low hemoglobin, or hypoxia, as it's called, as we'll see. Classical symptoms, and most of these are due to B3 deficiency. Classical symptoms of B3 or NAD deficiency is pellagra. This is dermatitis, dementia, and diarrhea. And these are very general words. You know, diarrhea, what does it actually mean? You know, loose bowels, would that be the same as irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease? It covers the whole, it's a symptom, isn't it? Dermatitis just means skin problems. Well, most of our patients have got skin problems of some form or other, haven't they? And dementia is the biggest thing, and of course dementia could be schizophrenic at one end, could be senile dementia at another. So B3 deficiency, you know, covers those 3 Ds, cover an awful lot of different disorders. So the symptoms could be inflamed skin, diarrhea, dementia, sores in the mouth. Areas of the skin exposed to either sunlight or friction are typically affected first. Over time, the affected skin may become darker, stiff, and begin to peel and bleed. Symptoms are often indistinguishable from schizophrenia, with symptoms peaking in the spring and summer when sufferers were more exposed to the sun. The key thing, as you'll see in the second part, is sunlight aggravates heme deficiency or porphyria problems. They're worse in bright light, particularly of a particular frequency around the 400 nanometers. So note here the links to porphyria, which we'll talk about after the break. Vitamin B3 also acts as a methyl group acceptor. The resulting compound is called methyl nicotinamide, which is then excreted. Thus it can decrease the formation of adrenaline from noradrenaline, and thus decrease the formation of adrenochrome. So again, B3 has an effect of reducing the conversion of noradrenaline into adrenaline, and so will decrease the level of adrenochrome. Robert Beamish in 1989 showed that adrenochrome is primarily synthesized in the heart muscle. The heart, of course, uses more energy than anywhere else, doesn't it? So if you're failing with the Krebs cycle in the heart, this is going to lead to problems. but can bind to the mitochondrial DNA in any cell. Studies in the mid-20th century have indicated that adrenochrome is metabolized into one of two other substances, dihydroxyindole or adrenolutin. Dihydroxyindole seems to balance the anxiety and depression effects of adrenaline, whereas adrenochrome, however, primarily produces the toxic adrenochrome and combines with adrenochrome, making lutein. And this combination is hypothesized by Hoffer and Osmond to result in the disruption of the brain's normal biochemical processes. This disruption, according to their hypothesis, could be responsible for the symptomatology of schizophrenia. Nearly there. Stress increases the secretion of adrenaline and therefore adrenochrome in deficient people. I think we're all agreed there. Okay, stress increases noradrenaline, increases adrenaline, and if you're deficient in the B3, can switch on this adrenochrome, which can then lead to destruction or damage to the mitochondria, and then you get the chronic fatigue coming. That's why 20 years ago they introduced NADH as a solution, as a compound for treating chronic fatigue syndrome. So this hypothesis has long been opposed by the proponents of the established pharmaceutical industry. And I put in there, a bit like vitamin D and the coronavirus. So treatment will be mega doses of niacin. I'm personally against that, but there may be sometimes when you've got high cholesterol that high doses of niacin will work, whereas NADH doesn't. On the other hand, it may be that B3 is not required and B6 is required, or P5P. Sometimes adenosylcobalamin, the active coenzyme of B12, and vitamin C, zinc, and magnesium. And those compounds, as you'll see, are exactly the same compounds that are needed when people have got hypoxia and when they go on to get cryptopyrrole and porphyrin problems. Now, back in, when I did AK back in the 1980s, we had to learn about schizophrenia in our AK class. And we just learnt it to do the exams, really. A bit like biochemistry at college, because it was, we don't treat schizophrenia. And, I sort of put it to sleep for 30 years, thinking, no, we don't treat schizophrenia. I don't go out of my way or don't get patients come in and say, I'm schizophrenic. Until I discovered that probably half our patients are schizophrenic. But it may be here or they may be down here. It's just a matter of the degree of it. And if there is a link to nutrition, this is worth so much more than ending up on antipsychotic drugs. So the way Dr. Goodhart used to describe it, and Goodhart took all his findings from Hoffer and Osmond's work, is he found that it was a cross-therapy localization to kidney 27. Now you're all familiar probably with this one, aren't you, with the kidney 27 for switching. So it has to be a two-handed therapy localization on that. And if you rub that, it's usually tender, isn't it? I used to have a friend of mine, we taught anatomy together. He said, I know kidney 27, Chris. He said, when you rub it on a patient, it makes them squeal. So I said, yeah, that's right, Brian. And he said, if it's not tender, he said, you can discharge the patient. But he said, it's always tender, so you keep the patient. So what Goodhart found, actually I think it was Bob Blake found this, and told Goodhart about it, is a cross-therapy localization. And that means touching kidney 27 with the crossing, but you mustn't let the hands touch. Okay, so that would mean probably you've got to use a leg muscle here, and that would be one thing that you would suspect. Apparently, schizophrenic patients who diagnosed with schizophrenia all weaken to this. And along with that, and I never took anything notice of this for 30 years, is that these people walk homolaterally. Now, they don't walk like that. You never see that. This idea of homolateral crawl and things that we were taught, you never see this. Have you ever seen somebody? But I find if I walk backwards, I tend to go straight into homolateral crawl. So if I'm walking backwards, I'm schizophrenic. So watch it. I think, why am I walking homolaterally? So we've all got it in it because perhaps we didn't pattern as children, as infants, walking backwards. Perhaps we all crawled forwards, but we should actually crawl sideways and backwards to get that patterning in. And what Dr. Goodhart found is that schizophrenics tended to be stuck in this homolateral crawl, which really meant that they were using more their pons and medullary brain rather than the midbrain part. And along with this, they would have weak neck flexors. So neck flexors tested as a group or as an individual. They would have weak neck flexors, and they'd have sensory nerve disturbances. In other words, they could feel abnormal pains and aches and things with their sensation. And this was frequently associated with blood sugar handling. In other words, they had hypoglycemia. So these are, again, common things with adrenal problems, aren't they? You have low blood sugar as well. So the cross K27 player, without touching. Now, this doesn't mean that if you show positive to this, you've got schizophrenia. Okay, so let's not panic about it, but you could have. Okay, but as I say, don't worry about that, because we've all got it, probably, to some extent. Now, then what Dr. Goodhart and Walther suggested is you attempt to change from the positive cross-therapy localization to the usual positive kidney 27. So in other words, you want to get them to show to the positive 27 rather than the cross one. If unsuccessful, you have to actually teach them to homolateral crawl. Now, I've got a person I know and you know, Jill. If you watch him walk, his arms don't move. You know people like that? They walk slowly with intent, but you don't find any swing, with the arms at the time. Huh? You probably will see people, if you watch them, and if you watch the reverse, which is an athlete, you can easily see with an athlete with a sprinter, those that have the long stride and the long arm and leg will win the race. Those who don't have the long stride can't do the cross-patterning so well. Okay? So what a person who doesn't develop the cross-patterning is they don't move their arms. Because when they move their arms, they sort of screw themselves up neurologically. Okay? So this is a sign you don't see the homolateral people walking like this. I taught in Germany when I first became a diplomat in the late 1980s, and there was a Norwegian chiropractor on the course, and he whispered to me, he said, Chris, he said, that's why the Nazis lost the war. He said, the goose stepping was like this. And he said they all got neurological disorganization. Well, okay. So correct blood sugar handling stress. So change to standard switching is obtained by evaluating cloacals. I don't know whether you've done, do you do cloacals still in your cranial faults, gait mechanism, very important, the gait mechanism, doing those, getting those cross patterns. Niacin, or here we would use, nowadays we'd use NADH, vitamin B6 or P5P. Niacinamide is a sort of non-flush type of niacin. It doesn't work as well. Sometimes you need to have the flush to get it to work. But it's the ratio of the B3 to the B6 Goodhart found, or the other way around, and correcting blood sugar when putting a person on little and often as far as complex carbohydrates and things. So let's find out who's who. Who'd like to be tested? We could continue with Steve. Anybody think that he might be a bit... You want to be tested, do you? Yeah, good, okay. Oh, no, well, let's see. Have you been tuned in? You've done your light therapy and things.
Only what I've done with Linda today.
Yes, yeah. But as long as you don't want to do this without tuning in, because you might not see the whole truth. Okay? So if you pop yourself down there. Now, you should have been given some little acetates. Shall we do the acetates inside your set? Oh, you got a set. Ooh, we never usually get a set. Okay. So cryptopyrrole, we'd leave those off. Adrenochrome. Yeah, it must be those. So let's do that. So if you find the adrenochrome, we'll keep the other ones to the second part this afternoon. So we'll be dealing with the pyrroles after the break. So what we're looking is it's at 462 nanometers which is in the mid-range of the blue. Okay, so that's the adrenochrome. So let's bring you up there, that's it. Good. Bend up here. And pull your knee to your shoulder. Okay, so you're just going to put it on the skin there, pull, and she does weaken to it. Okay, good. Okay, now that doesn't mean you're schizophrenic just because you weaken to your adrenochrome. Now, if you go across now, kidney 27 on one side, kidney 27 on the other, but don't let the hands touch. This is very, very important because you'll miss it if you let the hands touch. Pull. She's got it. Don't trust her whatsoever. Okay. Life's an illusion. Okay, so if you take those off, and now if you get me the NADH, what we'll do is we'll test her for NADH, which would be the first thing that Hoffer and Goodhart would have gone for.
Do you want the one in
NADH.
glycerin?
It'll be in glycerin, yeah. NADH is the active coenzyme of B3,
NADH.
and therefore is better absorbed and used in glycerin. So we see that strengthens her nicely. Tie the P5P.
In glycerin, yeah.
In glycerin. Don't bother with anything else. Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, NADH is winning. So do the cross-therapy localization again. Okay. So pull. Yeah. So the NADH wins. What was her meridians? What were her meridians?
Heart and spleen.
What?
Heart and spleen.
Heart and spleen. So you didn't have any therapy or anything? No, nobody's treated you in any way. No. Now push the hand towards the floor. So heart, what am I doing? I'm doing subscapularis, aren't I? Spleen, we know. Pull is lats, push down to the floor, and push down to the floor, and straighten the elbow. It's triceps, that's beautiful. So let's go back with the NADH. So triceps, push down, looking good.
Mm.
We're only doing half of it, and the heart. Okay. So remember the place where they discovered, where he discovered the high levels of adrenochrome were in the heart. Okay. The first place that he found that the adrenochrome built up was in the heart. Heart, stress, are they connected? Do you think? People who have a lot of stress have heart problems. Does it not make sense to you? Okay, it makes complete sense now, doesn't it? When you miss this out for 30 years as old stuff, but in fact what this is really brand spanking new stuff, old stuff rewritten, but it's so vibrant and alive now, and it has much more meaning now than it did obviously 30, 40 years ago. Because now we've got tools that we can actually measure this. So have you had a period of stress in your life? You know, yes, severe stress for usually long periods. But I don't want to know what it is, but...
I have, yes.
Yes, she has, and that's usually what triggers it. So she had a long period of stress, up goes the noradrenaline, eventually that switches on the adrenals, so up goes the adrenaline, and because she's stressed and she probably doesn't have enough vitamin B3, she's shunting the adrenaline into making adrenochrome, which is poisoning her mitochondria and other tissues in the body. Okay? See how it all sort of makes a nice pattern there. And so if you try that, you'll find that NADH is the one that mostly does it, but it only seems to work really well when it's in glycerin. Okay, so you will find that it'll strengthen, the right remedy has to strengthen all the muscles that you already determined are weak with it. There was something else I was going to ask you. Doesn't matter. Okay, we'll come back to it, okay? Oh, shall we do the dose? Could we have some energy? So let's do a dose for her. So you should all know how to dose. So the dose is the amount, obviously, that will strengthen her and negate the weakness, which we can say is the weakness in the muscles. So we can bring the muscles up to strength.
NADH.
So we could use a lat or a heart muscle. The heart muscle sort of gives it away, as you probably won't remember now, but the heart muscle that Gill talked about, the subscapularis, is related to high levels of noradrenaline. So we've already got the adrenaline in the picture there. So high levels of noradrenaline reflect in the heart muscle and the heart meridian. Yeah. Let's stick it on
Oh,
there.
we've got one there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put in 10 drops. Give it a good shake because glycerine, as I said, is very sweet. It's quite thick. It's like as soon as you taste it, you'll say, oh, that's a throat linctus, like cough medicine there.
Do you want to squirt or 10?
No, do 10 drops.
Okay.
Usually a squirt is 20 drops with glycerine, but it's 2/3 water, 1/3 glycerine. 10. So if you read out on the back there, how many drops to a milligram?
How many drops to a milligram?
How many drops are there in a minute?
This side. 10 drops.
It's a milligram?
Yes.
Yes. So 1 milligram is a sort of pretty standard dose if you were deficient. But we're not talking about a deficiency, we're talking about an individual need of somebody. So the likelihood is a much greater dose.
Do you want 10 more?
Yeah. Some people might need 10 drops, that's fine. Some people might need 100 drops.
10, so that's 20.
But at least we're giving her the thing that she needs. Now we used the glass vial, which told us, because that's just got the simulated copy of it, that told us she's strengthened, so we know we've got the right remedy. What we don't know is how much she needs, so you've got to actually do that with the remedy itself. So that's 30 drops. Paul? There's a slight glimmer there. I'm getting there. There's 1,900 drops to a 100 ml bottle. So there's, although it may be, what's that, 40? 40. Oh, that's better. So we're coming in at 40 drops at the moment, which would be 4 milligrams, which you'd be lucky to see 4 milligrams. A gram is a paperweight, a paperclip. Okay, that's the weight of a paperclip. A milligram is 1,000th of that. So she needs 3 milligrams. So it's very small, isn't it? You know, when people say, oh, I have 40 drops, that's a lot. It's not. Yes.
For how long?
Probably forever. Probably, yes. But on the other hand, it's probably, if you do it for usually 2 or 3 weeks, what I do, and then retest. So probably what will happen is it will go down. But the main thing is she is not deficient in B3. Okay, she's deficient in being able to get B3 to work. And that's the difference. She can't activate B3 from niacinamide or niacin into NAD.
But potentially the drops will be reduced as well then?
Yes. Yeah, after two to 3 weeks, they'll probably reduce down. Mostly they halve. So she'll probably go from 40 to 20, and then she may go down another month after that to 10, and then she may not show. And then she'll come back about a month after that and say, all my symptoms are back. What's happened? And you'll find, oh, she's gone back up to 40 drops again. So you'll find it'll go on. B3 is not stored, it's a water soluble, it's not like a fat soluble. She'll be fine for a little bit, and then back come all the symptoms. Do you have any symptoms that you're, not necessarily the stress, but just tell us any symptoms you've got health-wise?
I can't sleep. I fall asleep easily, but I wake up a lot.
She falls asleep easily, but wakes up a lot. Is there a time when you wake up?
Usually about 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock.
1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So 1 o'clock is the beginning of liver time, isn't it? Okay. And 4 o'clock is the beginning of lung time, or into lung time. So what should we do? How do we change her into talk liver? Push down there. So push.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So she's going to take a PMS. Are you familiar with PMS, bacterial major sternal muscle? No. Okay. Okay. So she's nice and strong with that. What we're going to do is we're going to take her to the liver alarm point, which is liver 14. Okay. Now, on liver 14, if we just take a strong indicator muscle, she's nice and strong. Yep. But if we take the PMS, push down, she's weak. So now we're going with the NAD, push, so that'll help you sleep. Okay, what was the other time? Lung time, wasn't it?
Yes.
So let's do the same with that. So deltoid, push above your head. Okay, now touch on the alarm point for the lung, push above your head. And put on the NADH, nice and strong. Good, isn't it? Okay, so Dr. Goodall called that the then and now technique. Did he teach the then and now technique? Yeah. So now if it's a person who has a symptom, you ask yourself, when do you get most of your symptoms? Whatever your symptoms are, is there a time of the day or the night when they're worse? You know, do you flake in the afternoon after about 3:30? Do you flake, or do you wake up in the night and so on? And that muscle tests strong, and the alarm points all test strong. You think, how can I get into that particular time with a person? Okay, it's use the muscle of the meridian and you therapy localise the alarm point. Okay, do you understand that? Is it? Yes? Okay, so if it was 6 o'clock in the morning you woke up, that's large intestine time. So you take a large intestine muscle, like the tensor fasciae lata, strong, therapy localised with the muscle, the alarm point, just outside of the umbilicus, and it goes weak. And then you're into the large intestine. So probably if you learnt nothing else, one of those important things that John said, if you learn only one thing, and the other thing is, of course, to learn if you're schizophrenic or not, isn't it? Okay, you're done at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll give you, at this stage, we'll say 40 drops, which is 4 milligrams, once a day for at least 2 or 3 weeks. Do you have somebody who can test you? No?
No, not close to me anyway.
Where do you live?
Bristol.
Bristol? Right, so what you all should have is somebody to look after you. It's nice to have somebody who looks after you, isn't it?
Can I just ask, with that NADH, why wouldn't you give it to them with B3?
Give it with B3?
Yeah.
Because her problem is not B3, her problem is she can't use the B3. She can't activate it into NADH.
Got enough B3?
Yes, she probably weakened to B3.
Can you check that?
No, but you can do. But I can tell you, she's strengthening to NADH, which means that she can't activate. If she got enough B3, she would be converting it herself. But she can't. She can't convert enough by the rate of 4 milligrams a day. Okay. Now that's a lot, 4 milligrams. It doesn't sound very much, but it's quite a lot because when the RDA of that is normally 1 to 2 milligrams. So she's pretty low. And has been. How long have you been sort of feeling like you've been feeling?
Sleep problems for quite some time.
No, how long is some time?
A few years.
A few years. Okay, that's right. And tell us a little bit about your childhood. Not where you went to school, but you know, just any. Did you have any symptoms or any problems as a child?
Yes, I had.
Give a microphone. You can hear? Yes. Okay.
Bedwetting when I was.
Bedwetting.
And I got things wrong. I didn't understand them.
Are you listening? No. Okay. Can you explain it?
Yeah, so was it bedwetting and...
Bedwetting.
And not understanding.
And also I got things wrong, so I didn't quite understand.
Okay, so difficulty in understanding and getting things wrong.
Getting things wrong.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Come on. Yes. Okay. Anything else?
As an adult, I overthink and worry.
And worry.
So the
Yes.
same thought patterns of going round and round and round in my head.
She's
So
permanently got
overthinking
adrenaline.
and worrying. Did you hear that? Yeah.
She permanently keeps worrying. It's not abnormal. This is a common symptom of people, poor sleep, same thoughts going round and round. This is adrenaline. But it's not adrenaline, interestingly, in most people. It's adrenochrome, and that's the only way you'll discover it, is by using the marker there of adrenochrome or the acetate of it. It's the oxidized derivative of adrenaline that does this. You could have adrenaline test, and they could be all right on adrenaline, but it's high adrenochrome, and it's shunting it because she's deficient in the B3. In this case, it's the activation. So it's not usually people who are deficient in B3, it's they're deficient in the ability to get B3 to work. They have this polymorphism where they can't activate niacin enough into NADH. And if you go back into history, this is a genetic problem usually. And this will come out in childhood in certain conditions, certain symptoms, and then as an adult in different symptoms. Okay? But it's probably been there all the time, but it's never been recognised what it is. You wouldn't recognise this until this afternoon, probably, would you? Now you can say, ooh, I've got a patient like that, or my mum's like that, or whatever it might be, or I'm like that, or my husband's like that.
I think it's coffee time.
It's
now.
coffee time.